Hi, this is Vicki Robinson, and today I want to show you 2 quick ways that you can make minor corrections to photographs that you might want to use on your DigiScrap pages or in your art journals, but that have some sort of imperfection that you'd like to try to correct. I'm going to be using Photoshop Elements 2018. The same tools are also available in the full version of Photoshop. Let's start with this really cute image of my father-in-law from 1923, and as you can see, somewhere along the line his cute little face got some sort of marker added to it. I'm going to go to my spot healing brush, and that is found under the Enhance menu. I'm going to click on that. If you come down to the options bar, you see that there are 2 brushes. This one is called the healing brush. We're not going to be working with that one. We're just going to be using the spot healing brush here. You want to make sure that the type is set to proximity match, that you're using the default brush. I'd recommend the default brush that Photoshop is set to. It's a hard round brush, and then we can vary the size according to the kind of thing we're trying to correct. Let me make this just a little bit bigger for you. You want your brush in this case to be just a little bit bigger than the area that you're trying to correct. And mine is showing at 40 pixels, and it looks like that's going to be perfect. Now this is so simple you're not going to believe it. I'm just going to click slightly above where that blemish is, and then drag straight down and let go. And as you can see, it's magically disappeared. Photoshop has looked at all the surrounding pixels of that area I was trying to correct of my brush selection and tried to fill it in from what it can tell. Now, it may not be absolutely perfect. For purposes of your scrapbook pages, that looks just fine. To me, I can see a little bit of a shadow here that I don't like, so I'm going to try it again. I'm going to Control or Command Z to undo. I'm going to make my brush a little tiny bit smaller, just like this, so that it gets less pixels around his face, and then click and drag, and let go. Much better, much better. Now, while you're at it, if you see there's some dust here, then that probably, that could have come on the photograph, that could have been on my scanner. I can actually get rid of these 2 just by, here's one over here, just by selecting those tiny little pixels. So that's one way, using the spot healing brush, that we can remove small imperfections in your photographs. Now for the second technique I'm going to show you, we're going to use this photograph that was taken by my sister of a beautiful stone gate. But you can see there's a couple of things here with this photograph that we'd want to fix. First of all, she's got there's this big directional arrow here in the corner, over here on the left side, and then this little mailbox peeking through. So these areas are a little bigger, and so instead we're going to try another tool. I'm going to increase this a little bit and move over so you can see what I'm working on here. Instead of using the healing brush, which would probably work, it would just take a little while, we're going to use another tool called Content Aware Fill. Now this technique feature was not built into Photoshop Elements until version 13, I believe. So if you're using an earlier version than 13, you're going to need to use the healing brush that we talked about. But to use the Content Aware Fill, I'm going to come up to my rectangular marquee tool here. I want the rectangular marquee. I don't want any feathering here, and I want my aspect to be normal. And I'm going to come and make a selection slightly above, and then slightly to the left, and then just as close as I can get it to these stones on the right. If you need to reposition while you're clicking and dragging, hold down your space bar, and then you can see you can move your selection. But that only works if you have not lifted your hand from the mouse yet. If you have lifted it, you just have to Control or Command D to deselect, and then try again. That looks pretty good to me, so I'm going to let go of my space bar, let go of my mouse. Now I'm going to come up to the Edit menu and choose Edit Fill Selection. From this flyout menu, you want to make sure you're on Content Aware. You want the mode to be normal, the opacity to be 100%, and you want to make sure that your Preserve Transparency box is deselected, not checked. Say OK. and then watch this magic happen. Say OK, Control or Command D to deselect, and how cool is that? Pretty much perfect my first time. What Photoshop has done, as it was doing with the spot healing brush, is it's looking for surrounding pixels to try to remove from the image. You know what? As we're looking at this, I see something else over here. Look over here. There's a little, it's probably like an address plate here. I'm going to, let me move over here and make this a little bit bigger. We're going to try, oops, that's really big. Now, if you get too big, this might not work. Let's see if we can do it even though it's this big. If you're zoomed in too far, Photoshop gets pretty confused. So let's try this again. Going back to the rectangular marquee, I'm going to click and drag right around my selection. Move it slightly here and over here. Come up to Edit, Fill Selection, Content Aware again. Say OK, and then Control or Command D to deselect. Now that is really cool, isn't it? Now, again, I told you this is not a technique you're going to use if you're submitting your photograph to some art competition for, photography competition on how great your photographs are, because anybody that is a specialist can actually tell that this photograph has been altered. Remember, this is just for your personal use on your photographs for your scrapbook and your art journal. Let me come back and let's try this one because I wanted to show you something else. Here. This one, it looks like it's fairly simple because it's just a rectangle that we're trying to replace. But if I were to just make this selection right here on these lines, trying to get that exact, and come up to Edit, Fill Selection, and then again, Content Aware, Command D to deselect, Control or Command D, we can see a couple of problems with this. First, I didn't obviously get all of that rectangular sign, so there's still traces of that left. And the other thing that I can see is if this was a real picture, and maybe this is busy enough you really wouldn't notice, but if I zoom out here, you can see that this tree trunk should be continuing straight all the way down. And it's going to bug me because to me that's glaring that see how this tree trunk here continues right behind these leaves. So let's see if we can't do a better job of this. I'm going to zoom back in. I'm going to Control or Command Z. Don't forget you can always undo. So the first Control Z puts me back to my selection. Next one puts me back to my sign. And then I'm going to Control or Command D to deselect. To make sure that Photoshop knows that I'm trying to get this tree here, remember it's looking for surrounding pixels. So it needs pixels at the top and pixels at the bottom to use as a guide. Coming back to my rectangular marquee tool, this time I'm going to select just above the sign here and then drag down maybe slightly to the left. I'm holding my space bar. Slightly to the left here so I get the green behind the sign. You can see I'm slightly above and slightly below and slightly to the right. And come back to the Edit menu, choose Fill Content Aware, say OK. Oh, and you can see Control or Command D, you can see it did a much better job. The cool thing about Photoshop in both Elements and in the full version is that every time you undo a fill selection, content aware fill, Elements, the software is trying to learn what you were trying to do, and it's learning from its mistakes or your mistakes. So every time you retry it, it should get a little bit better at doing your content aware fill. So there you have it, 2 quick ways to make minor corrections to your photographs using Photoshop Elements. Thanks for watching.